I'm sorry. Morning. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Let the fun begin. This hearing is called to order. I recognize the presence of a quorum of the committee members. This is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 230144, 230145, 230146, 230147, 230148, 230149, and resolution number 230162. Mr. McDermott, please read the titles of the bills and resolution.
Bill number 230144, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2024 to 2029 inclusive. Bill number 230145, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2024 capital budget. Bill number 230146, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2024. Bill number 230147, an ordinance amending Chapter 191500 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Wage and Net Profits Tax by revising certain tax rates under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 230148, an ordinance amending Chapter 192800 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority Tax on Wages and Net Profits to provide for the continuation of the tax and to make other conforming changes, all under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 230149, an ordinance amending Chapter 192600 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Business Income and Receipts Taxes by revising certain tax rates under certain terms and conditions. Resolution number 230162, providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2024 through 2028 and incorporating revised changes with respects to fiscal year 2023, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority. Pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement authorized by an ordinance of this Council, approved by the Mayor on January 3rd, 1992, by and between the City and the Authority.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Today we begin hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2024, a capital program, a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2024 through fiscal 29, Council President. Today we will hear testimony from the administration on the 5-year plan and the capital program. First person to testify from the administration, Mr. McDermott, is
Cristina Pastrana Hernandez, Chief of Staff for Mayor Kenny.
Thank you. Morning.
Good morning, Council President. If I may. Hello? Can you hear me? All right.
Absolutely.
Good morning, Council President and members of Council. Before I begin my official testimony, I wanted to use this opportunity to update you all and the public on the most recent news this morning regarding the quality of the water from the Baxter treatment plant. Based on the most recently available sampling, the water remains safe to drink and use at least through 11:59 p.m. tomorrow, Wednesday, March 29th. The City will provide further updates based on the latest sampling data as it becomes available. We will continue to monitor the situation closely and will be providing a media briefing later this evening to further advise the public on the developing situation. I also want to take this time to acknowledge and thank the incredibly hardworking employees of the Water Department, the Office of Emergency Management, and many others who've been working around the clock to monitor and respond to this situation. Due to the ongoing review and response to this rapidly evolving situation, several key officials are not present here today to help answer questions. For example, some folks from MDO or the Water Department. Please hold any questions you may have for these departments until the Managing Director's Office budget hearing date, currently scheduled for Tuesday, April 11th at 10 a.m., or until the department's respective hearing dates later in April. Once again, the water remains safe to drink and use at least through 11:59 p.m. tomorrow, Wednesday, March 29th. Thank you for your indulgence. My name is Cristina Pastrana Hernandez, Chief of Staff to Mayor Kenny, and I'm honored here to testify in support of the mayor's proposed 5-year plan, his last for his term as mayor, along with all the supporting budget and revenue bills that were introduced on March 2nd, 2023. Joining me today are Finance Director Rob Dubow and cabinet members and department heads from across the administration. As the Kenny administration enters its final year, the mayor is optimistic about Philadelphia's bright future and remains committed to the urgent work still left to do to ensure every Philadelphian can reach their potential. The FY2024-28 plan builds on the progress of the past 7 years and lessons learned from some of the greatest challenges our city has ever faced, including a global pandemic, a nationwide reckoning on racial injustice, and a crisis of gun violence that has brought tragedy to too many families. This 5-year plan renews our commitment to becoming a more resilient and equitable city, driven by the mayor's 4 key priorities: a safer and more just Philadelphia, quality education for all, thriving neighborhoods, and inclusive growth and economic opportunity. After several years of significant financial uncertainty, and despite the continued effects of higher inflation and the continued possibility of economic recession in the short term, the FY24-28 plan charts a course to relative fiscal stability, building some financial cushion to help weather future disruptions while making the investments needed to ensure Philadelphia can return to and continue the growth and progress we saw prior to the pandemic. The city continues to be buoyed by critical federal investments, including $1.4 billion in state and local fiscal relief funds supplied by President Biden's American Rescue Plan, which provided a lifeline among pandemic budget shortfalls, and the funds flowing from the bipartisan infrastructure law, which are enabling historic and transformative investments in the city's roads, bridges, transit, water infrastructure, and broadband access, supporting Philadelphia's workers and businesses, especially those who've been locked out of opportunity for too long. Today, Philadelphia's poverty rate is at a 15-year low, and the Kenny administration has reduced wage and business taxes to their lowest levels in decades. We celebrate the progress while knowing that too many in our city are still left behind. The commitments and priorities in this 5-year plan are aimed at ensuring the city delivers on its promise to create quality schools in every neighborhood, provide justice and safety for all, build thriving neighborhoods with world-class community spaces, and generate inclusive growth and economic opportunity well into the future. Our city sadly continues to grapple with shooting and homicide rates that are significantly higher than they were before the COVID-19 pandemic. The mayor recognizes that there is no more urgent task before us than preventing the tragic deaths that are devastating families and traumatizing communities every day. Increasing community safety, reducing gun violence, and supporting residents in neighborhoods disproportionately impacted by gun violence and incarceration are the top priorities for the mayor. This plan includes historic levels of investment in anti-violence programming and provides additional investments in the continued implementation of the Roadmap for Safer Communities, the city's violence prevention plan. The full set of violence prevention investments, including long-term investments in education, totaled $208 million in the FY23 budget, and those same categories of investment grow with intensity and intentionality in FY24. In addition, recognizing that it will take all of us in a citywide effort to tackle this challenge, the city looks forward to continued partnership with the Civic Coalition to Save Lives, to expand ongoing efforts to work with the most at-risk individuals to reduce shootings. While preventing violence is not a job for police alone, the 5-year plan makes strategic investments to strengthen the police department's ability to address violent crime. The plan invests $14.7 million over 5 years in the Office of Forensic Science, which will be paired with a recently awarded $25 million state grant, improving PPD's ability to process forensic evidence and develop investigative leads in support of solving crimes. This includes 14 positions that were previously held by sworn personnel, but will now be filled by civilians, which will further assist police operations by freeing up officers to focus on patrol and investigative activities. These investments complement the $50 million in funding being provided in the capital budget to build a new state-of-the-art forensic lab. Together, these investments will help police continue to build on last year's improvements to its homicide clearance rate, which increased from 42% in 2021 to 47% in 2022. In addition, the plan includes $1.8 million in FY24 and $9.2 million over 5 years to support the police department's analytical programs in service of Operation Pinpoint, the department's strategy to focus resources and efforts on the people and places most likely to experience violent crime. It also includes $1 million over 5 years to improve the police department's ability to equitably recruit and hire a diverse pool of qualified candidates that better represent the communities that PPD serves. In FY24 and throughout the plan, the city will also increase investment in other partners who are critical to the functioning of an equitable, efficient, and accountable criminal justice system. The plan invests an additional $5 million per year and $25 million over 5 years in the District Attorney's Office to sustain its critical work on investigations and prosecutions. The plan also invests $5 million per year and $25 million over 5 years in the Defender Association of Philadelphia to provide high-quality legal services and better meet the needs of vulnerable Philadelphians involved in the criminal justice system. The budget includes funds to further strengthen the city's evidence-based anti-violence programs. For example, it adds $1.4 million over 5 years to provide new stipends for participants in the Group Violence Intervention GVI strategy, which a recent evaluation found significantly reduced group member-involved shootings. In addition, the plan invests over $700,000 to provide trauma supports to frontline staffers in anti-violence programs. Finally, Mayor Kenney recognizes that criminal justice fees and debt can act as a barrier to economic opportunity and keep people unnecessarily entangled in the criminal justice system. The plan will also establish a $5 million fund in FY24 to help clear criminal justice debts that currently prevent Philadelphians from being able to access employment and other opportunities. The plan makes significant investments in PHL Pre-K, a transformative program started during the Kenney administration and funded by the Philadelphia beverage tax. It will create 950 new seats in FY24 for a total of 5,250 seats to provide children and families with free and high-quality early learning services that have already been served over 15,000 children. PHL Pre-K will also receive $4.4 million in FY24 and $22 million over the 5-year plan to provide supports to participating children experiencing various forms of direct and vicarious trauma. Mayor Kenney is building on the historic commitments to public education that he has made over his 2 terms by investing nearly $1.4 billion over the life of the 5-year plan in the school district of Philadelphia. FY24 includes $282 million contribution to the school district of Philadelphia, which represents a 171% increase from FY16 when the mayor first came into office. The plan also includes $2.2 million over 5 years in additional supports for the 20 city-supported community schools that serve a wide range of needs for students, families, and communities. In ongoing pursuit of accessible and affordable community college, the FY24 budget supports the continuation of the Octavius Catto Scholarship at the Community College of Philadelphia. Since its start in FY21, over 1,400 Catto Scholars have received tuition-free enrollment combined with basic needs funding and other enhanced supports to help them succeed. The city's investment in the Catto Scholarship is projected at $11.7 million in FY24 and $58.5 million over the life of the 5-year plan. Combined, the city proposes investing a total of more than $225 million in CCP over the next 5 years to further accessibility, affordability, and attractiveness of CCP as a post-secondary institution of choice. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the critical importance of digital access and highlighted the inequities that persist in who can fully participate in an increasingly digital world. In 2020, the city created the PHL Connected program to address this challenge. This plan invests $8.3 million, which paired with the new federal resources through the infrastructure law, will continue to address barriers to access and affordability of broadband internet and digital devices and provide digital navigation services. The Kenney administration seeks to build thriving neighborhoods and enhance quality of life for residents everywhere in Philadelphia. The plan includes additional investments in the Rebuild Initiative, which is delivering major improvements to parks, playgrounds, recreation centers, and libraries across the city. To date, 13 project sites have been completed. First fix improvements have been completed or are underway at another 38 sites, and construction is underway or about to begin at 19 sites. In this year alone, Rebuild is expected to break ground on over 20 full flagship projects and cut the ribbon on 15 full flagship projects, the most impactful year yet. Rebuild is also a national model for inclusive infrastructure development, with 45.5% of total hours worked to date by women and people of color, and 65.4% of committed contract dollars awarded to diverse businesses. Rebuild has provided workforce development training for 70 Philadelphians, with 72% of active program graduates accepted into union apprenticeships or full-time work. Rebuild has also provided important business supports for 146 diverse businesses. The plan is also expanding investments to ensure these critical neighborhood assets are available when residents need them. Building on investments in the FY23 budget, this plan increases investment in the Free Library of Philadelphia by $10.7 million in FY24 and by $51.3 million over the next 5 years to stabilize and expand service levels to 6-day service at neighborhood library branches. The plan also includes sustained funding for weekend hours at Parks and Rec centers. To date, the Parks and Rec team have been able to create weekend hours at 66 recreation centers, and we are on track to have all rec centers open on the weekend by the end of 2023. Building thriving neighborhoods will require resources to increase housing stability for residents and meet the needs of those who are at risk of losing their housing or who are already experiencing homelessness. The plan includes $28.9 million over 5 years to expand the Right to Counsel initiative citywide. It includes $6.7 million over 5 years to provide 100 new supportive housing units for people who are chronically homeless, $3.16 million over 5 years to operate Sanctuary Village, the city's first tiny house community, and $2.37 million over 5 years to sustain the Kensington-focused encampment resolution team. To deliver cleaner streets in neighborhoods with the greatest need, FY24 will also see the expansion of the mechanical street sweeping program, with a projected increase of 6 additional neighborhoods served, which will now reach a projected total of 20 neighborhoods. The FY24 budget will also invest $1.8 million to deploy an additional illegal dumping crew, which together with the FY23 investment creates a total of 4 new crews available to move quickly and strategically to address illegal dumping. The plan includes a second year of strategic investment to ensure Philadelphia can compete for and successfully deploy federal bipartisan infrastructure law dollars to transform communities and build wealth and opportunity for Philadelphians. The FY24 budget includes $22 million across 12 departments to maximize this historic opportunity. This investment is already yielding results. To date, the city has won more than $136 million in federal funds from 5 new competitive BIL grants, in addition to the $450 million that is expected in surface transportation formula funds. The FY24 budget also includes $836 million and $4.2 million over the 5-year plan for additional staffing for the Philadelphia City Planning Commission's work, in collaboration with communities to promote, plan, preserve, and develop successful neighborhoods for all. This increase recognizes the growth and development in the city and will support the Commission's work to create an updated comprehensive plan that builds trust with communities and reflects the values of the city's residents, with racial equity at its core. Finally, Philadelphia has emerged from the heart of the pandemic in a strong position to build a dynamic, thriving economy that benefits all residents. This 5-year plan includes no tax rate increases and continues wage and business tax reductions in FY24, building on the success of the Inclusive Growth Coalition to make Philadelphia as competitive as possible. In this plan, the new rate for the resident wage tax, 3.765%, would be the lowest rate in more than 40 years, and the BERT rate at 5.83% would be the lowest in 35 years. A critical component of any strategy for inclusive growth is a safe, affordable, and efficient public transit system. The plan includes $31 million per year for 2 years to pilot a new zero-fare transit program for at least 25,000 Philadelphia residents near or below the poverty line that will provide access to trips anywhere on the SEPTA system. The city's 2016 Community Needs Assessment found that 39% of residents in poverty cite transportation as the top barrier to their ability to get and keep a job. This investment will make it easier and more affordable for those low-income residents to get to work, as well as access health, education, and recreation opportunities. As part of its ongoing efforts to make the city of Philadelphia an employer of choice, the city will also invest $9 million per year to join other large employers in the region as part of the SEPTA Key Advantage program, providing free transit to all city employees through a 2-year pilot program. The city's investment in transit passes for our workforce is an opportunity to provide a high-value benefit to current and prospective employees at a time of high turnover rates and difficulty hiring in a competitive labor market that also supports broader goals of sustainability, resiliency, and equity in Philadelphia. Now is a critical time to make this kind of investment in our transit system. SEPTA has faced years of lowered ridership compared to pre-pandemic levels, and this kind of buy-in to the agency will help preserve its ability to provide affordable, quality service to all Philadelphians. Transit is essential. It connects residents to school, to work, and to critical services, and it supports a vibrant and accessible Philadelphia. The FY24 budget will also encourage inclusive economic growth by continuing support for the Quality Jobs Incentive Program, which will provide grants to businesses based on the creation of new quality jobs accessible to all Philadelphians. The Commerce Department will also provide grants through this program to companies operating in key target industries to drive the Philadelphia economy forward. FY24 will also see investment of $1.1 million in continued partnership with the civic and private sectors to supercharge our ongoing efforts to grow wealth in Black and brown communities through diverse business opportunities stemming from the bipartisan infrastructure law. The mayor believes that the residents serving their neighbors as City of Philadelphia employees are essential and treasured resource, and the city is making investments to create more equitable and efficient pathways into city employment. The city's Office of Human Resources is receiving an additional $2 million in FY24 for their critical work to recruit and hire public servants, including making processes more equitable and reducing the time it takes to hire and onboard new employees, and to enhance the experience for applicants. Through the investments I've outlined and others included in this plan, Philadelphia will work towards becoming a city where equal opportunities are open to all residents, race is not a determinant of success, and diversity is elevated as one of Philadelphia's greatest assets. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and we look forward to working with all members of council through this budget process. All of us here representing the administration are available to answer any questions you may have, including on the Mayor's Office and Department of Labor budgets, for which we have submitted written testimony. Next, we have testimony from Martine DeCamp on the proposed FY24 capital budget and the FY24-29 capital program. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Sorry.
Members, let me ask the members, there was a pretty significant testimony by the Chief of Staff. Members, would you like to wait and hear capital testimony, or would you like to get into questions before? Want to wait? Good call. Okay, thank you. Good morning. Please proceed.
Good morning.
Before we do that, I just wanted to reference, I talked to Councilman Thomas this morning as we get into this conversation about our budgeting decisions, and top of the food chain is always this issue around violence in the city of Philadelphia. We had an unfortunate incident this morning, another young person shot. So I'd like to just to have a moment of silence for that young person as we make these very, very thoughtful, unfortunate decisions. So if we could just ask for a moment of silence, please, by the audience and the members. Thank you. Thank you. Far too many of those. Good morning. Please proceed.
Good morning. Good morning, Council President Clark and members of City Council. I'm Martine DeCamp, Deputy Director of the City Planning Commission. Along with my city colleagues, we're here to present for your review and consideration the recommended FY 2024 to 2029 capital program and FY 2024 capital budget. These were approved by the City Planning Commission on March 27, 2023. The recommended program is a 6-year plan for investing in the city's physical and technology infrastructure, neighborhood and community facilities, city-owned buildings, and specialized vehicles. The recommended budget reflects the spending appropriations for the first year of the 6-year program. As both the program and budget are key instruments of planned physical development, the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter directs that their initial preparation and submission to the mayor be a function of the City Planning Commission. Beginning in the early fall of last year, the staff of the City Planning Commission and the Budget Office received and evaluated requests from 20 departments. We then worked with department heads and managers to produce a capital program and budget that address our capital needs, align with administration priorities, including racial equity, and reflect our financial resources and spending capacity. The recommended 6-year capital program calls for over $1.1 billion of new city tax-supported general obligation bond funding to support public improvements throughout Philadelphia. When possible, city funds are used to leverage additional resources provided by our much-appreciated regional, state, federal, and private partners. Considering all sources of funding, including self-sustaining aviation funds and water funds, and carry-forward appropriations from previous years, the recommended capital program proposes $13.2 billion of additional improvements. For FY2024 alone, the recommended capital budget calls for $185 million of new general obligation bond funding, which is consistent with recent budget years and the city's estimated ability to support debt service. The FY2024 capital budget will also benefit from recent savings from vacant positions and higher than expected tax revenues in the city's operating budget. An additional $71 million in new operating revenues is also recommended for appropriation to the capital budget in FY2024. For FY2024, recommendations in the capital budget include investments in streets, transit, parks, and energy efficiency improvements needed for building thriving neighborhoods, funding for city-owned free library, zoo, and art museum facilities to complement schools' capital investments and provide equitable educational resources for investing in future generations, renovations to fire, police, prison, health, and shelter facilities to help with enhancing public safety, funding for neighborhood commercial corridors and industrial and waterfront land redevelopment as part of the city's effort toward driving inclusive growth and economic opportunity, support for IT infrastructure, public property renovations, and fleet vehicles and facilities to help ensure efficient, effective, and diverse government. We are pleased to propose these investments, but we know they do not include all the projects the departments requested. There remains a lot of documented need. But the amount of recommended new general obligation bond funded supported spending in this year's capital program and budget is limited. Increasing city borrowing means increasing debt service and fixed costs, reducing the city's budgetary flexibility and potentially impacting the city's bond rating. A reduction in that rating could increase our cost to borrow. We do have the opportunity to spend down or reprogram carry-forward dollars from prior year appropriations before the city appropriates new tax-supported funds. With many projects experiencing delays as a result of the recent pandemic and global supply chain issues, the amount of carry-forward appropriations available to many departments remains significant. We also have an opportunity to strategically leverage our limited city appropriations to capital with federal and state grants, such as Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Overall, given our financial constraints and the challenges of the past 3 years, the administration feels the recommended capital program and budget invests in the city's infrastructure to the greatest extent possible. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. We'd be happy to address any questions that you may have. Please note that leaders of city departments are present to assist in answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. For our first round of questions, we're going to do 7 minutes, if that's okay with the members, and subsequent rounds will adjust as needed. Thank you. Yeah, that's a couple of quick questions before I turn it over to my colleagues. In referencing our 5-year plan, obviously, looking in our out years, particularly with the end of an administration, we always wonder how that transition works. In most cases, the next administration is not necessarily obligated to spend what is being proposed in the 24. 25 comes, new people, new council president, new mayor, maybe a whole different thought process. One wonders, and I actually had a conversation with one of my colleagues earlier, like one of the things that's near and dear to our heart, the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative. with this. We're like halfway through this $400 million borrowing. We want to make sure that that commitment is kept. We did agree when we first started talking about the $400 million, which is the commitment. We want to thank the administration for working with us. Should we borrow the entire 400 from a fiscal perspective, that was not necessarily the best thing to do. You didn't want money sitting around with interest payments that were not being spent. So we agree with that. But there's a concern that, and we have no idea who the next whatever is going to be, that that commitment is not continued throughout the next term. I guess the question is, and I probably know the answer, is there any way to lock in that additional $200 million to make sure that City Council in this cornerstone project is going to make sure that we'll realize the dream of those homeowners and the dream of those businesses and all the other commitments that were made as a result of the rollout of that program?
Well, thank you for that question, Council President. I will say off the top before handing it over to Rob to answer the more financial aspects, is that obviously over the last 7 years, the Kenney administration and many of these incredible public servants behind me have worked hard to further the equity for our residents and to make our neighborhoods stronger and better. And we sincerely hope that any future administration would build on the progress that this council and that this administration has worked on so hard together. So I will say that sort of off the top before handing it over to Rob.
Mr. Bean Counter, sir, can I get your response?
So a couple of things. One, we are preparing to do the second NPI bond issue, which would be another $100 million to get us up to $200 million. But as you said, for the reasons we talked about originally, we don't think it would make sense to do the full 300 now and have that money sitting there paying interest on it before it can be spent. But we agree that it's a really important program and that we're going to move it along as quickly as we can for our part.
So would you suggest that we accelerate the expenditure of the second tranche of 100 so we can do the third tranche of 100 while you guys are still around?
That would be great. Yeah, if we could get it spent more quickly so that we could do another issue, that would be great.
All
So,
right.
and we're constantly monitoring that to see how the spending is going and to see when it makes sense to borrow.
All right. Ms. Fadulin, you heard that? No, I don't need you to come up. Just wanted to make sure that you...
It was more rhetorical. You don't have to come up.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
You're okay.
All right. That's where the money flows. We just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, so we'll be ramping up the expenditures of the 300 at a minimum. All right, thank you. Another quick question. The American Recovery Plan dollars that we got from the federal government basically was the lifeline to municipalities across the country, and we're very happy. I think it was around the $1.4 billion that we realized, and our estimates, according to my chief bean counter here, is around $800 million left. Are we going to save that for the next administration, or are we going to be a little more aggressive in the FY2024 investment of those dollars? Because it's my understanding that there was some talk on Capitol Hill about possibly clawing back some of those dollars, particularly from the Republican House, now that they've taken over the House of Representatives.
We have those dollars fully allocated through the end of December 24, and it's required under the federal legislation that the money be spent by then and will be allocated by then, and we have that all allocated. We wanted to spread those dollars over the amount of time period that was allocated so we didn't have a sharp fiscal cliff. One of the things that put us in a different situation from other jurisdictions is we needed all of that money for revenue replacement. When we looked at the hole that the pandemic would create for us, it was about a $1.5 billion hole. So the $1.4 billion, as you said, was a lifeline, and we would have been making incredibly painful choices if we hadn't received it, but it didn't even fill the full hole. So we wanted to make sure that we used it in a way that kept our plan balanced over time and let us plan for life after those dollars.
But our revenues grew a little stronger than we anticipated, so we weren't necessarily as dependent on that recovery dollars to maintain such a significant fund balance. I was with the mayor last week, and he was pretty excited about, as he said, a whole lot of money on our fund balance. So given that our fund balance has grown more than anticipated, and there won't necessarily be as much of a need, I acknowledge that we have to be fiscally prudent, as much of a need for our recovery dollars. Is there some thought about investing strategically to make sure that the growth that happened as a result of some good investments that we in the city did would grow even further?
Yeah, so
based on those investments?
Yeah, so we would still be facing deficits in our plan, and fairly quickly if we didn't have those funds. Even though revenue's a little better than we thought, we'd still be facing deficits. But of course, we're looking to make investments that are strategic, and the dollars are really woven throughout our budget. So all the investments that we talk about are really possible because of those ARP dollars.
Okay. So as we, council members deliberate over this conversation, there are likely going to be some suggestions that there be a little more aggressive investments, strategic, prudent investments to ensure that our revenue grows. And we have that, it seems like every year we have it larger than we anticipated fund balance. There's no reason to think that that's not going to happen again.
I hope it does.
Yeah.
But
right.
Yeah, and we understand that this is going to be a back and forth, and that we'll be discussions about the appropriate way to allocate our dollars.
Right, okay. We talk about our staffing issues, and I want to thank Councilman Squilla, Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson, and Councilman O'Neill for participating in the special committee on retention and attraction. I think we're going to be rolling out some pretty good recommendations in the next week or two about how we can, one, fill those gaps in our employee base, but also be more competitive. And I think, Mr. DeBoe, you may have had some of the conversation with Ms. Tipton as a result of that. So it will be calling for, obviously, a much more enhanced compensation package for our employees, because we're just not competitive, particularly around police and some of the other entities in our government. So will you be giving some thought to enhance compensation for our employees to meet the goals or the recommendations of the Special Committee on Attention and Retraction? We talked about the police as an example. I think we start around $60,000 for our police, and the Delaware River Port Authority, they just made an announcement that they're going to put a package on the table starting out at $64,000 bonus, retention bonus, the whole 9 yards, just to basically ride across the bridge all day, right? Versus our police and there's no shot at the Delaware River Port Authority police, but I got to tell you, that's not a bad gig, just to kind of ride it back and forth over the bridge versus some of the stuff that our people have to deal with on a daily basis. So are you all giving thought as you continue to put together, work through this process? Because it's clear that we're going to have significant compensation issues for our employees.
And yes, I will say that the mayor, as well as all members of the administration, have been very much focused on employee retention as well as employee attraction.
Put your mic down a little bit more, please.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Hi, yes. The mayor, as well as all of the employees behind me, have been very concerned about employee retention as well as employee attraction and making the city of Philadelphia an employer of choice for Philadelphians and for many others to come here, start their families, and to live out throughout their careers. So it is a focus of ours, and we are working in partnership with council to determine what the best path forward is to be able to make us as attractive as possible.
All right, and Mr. DeBoe, the man with the money, have you?
Ditto.
Same thing, right? All right, okay. Because this, and I want to thank the administration for the participation of Ms. Tipton, Mr. Cagney, and all those folks. They're doing a really good job. But I think that we need to give some serious thought because we are not paying our people enough. At the end of the day, I want to thank the representative from District Council 33, Mr. Garrett, also, and Linda Orfinelli, Blast from the Past, who's participating. They're doing a really good job. So about a week or so, there should be a series of recommendations on how we figure this out because we can't continue to fund 4,000 or 5,000 positions in the city of Philadelphia based on vacancies and not be competitive and not deliver the level of services and not have enough, public service on the street, be it police, be it water department, where this is the big topic of the day where we have significant shortages, correction, all those other things. So we look forward to your response to that report. All right, thank you. Next up, Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you for the update on the budget. I want to focus a bit on capital. We have a lot of infrastructure money on the way. We have a ton of opportunities, both at the school district. Yesterday, we had a robust school district hearing about what the capital needs just for remediation of environmental issues in our schools. Commissioner of Public Property once showed an illustration in this chambers of how long it takes to start, plan, and execute a project. And it was an accordion-style chart that was placed out. And she pointed out the over 300 steps that it takes to begin and start and plan and execute a project. So my first question is, how are we doing on that backlog? It was estimated at a 10-year backlog. That's number one. Number two, have we cut down that time frame to make these things happen in a more expedient manner? Number three, have we internally filled positions so that as procurement, public property, and other evaluations in the streets department that have to be made on critical infrastructure bridges, are those things in place so that we can take advantage, expedite some of those projects? And then finally, we talked about this yesterday at the school district hearing. Is there a school to paycheck pipeline that can be developed from our CTE opportunities to get more people into apprenticeships, more people into actual work on some of the infrastructure jobs that we have? So internally, we've got this money coming into the city, federal, state opportunities, but are we internally ready to take on that new influx to cut down the 10 years, to cut into some of the critical employment aspects that, thank you, Kathy, for taking that charge on, but how are we internally ready to process some of this benefit that we are getting and cut down that 10-year pipeline to projects?
Okay. All right, so the short answer, I think, is we're working on it, and yes, we have decreased, or we've reduced the backlog. So thanks to all the departments back here, and I think we'll probably need to get specific numbers for you on how we've reduced that. In terms of reducing the timelines on projects, I think I would need to probably defer to specific departments, but I know, the departments are working to increase staffing levels. That's been one of the issues, is to make sure that we have the staff that can do all the work behind the scenes. Let's see, what else?
So we added $20 million in FY23, growing to $22 million in FY24 to build up that capacity that you're talking about, to make sure we're ready, one, to compete for the projects, and two, to implement them when we come in. And so we are staffing up just to meet the needs you're talking about.
And then we're also working on figuring out how to create a pipeline from internship to employee, so that we can bring on more diversity and bring on new folks that are trained up from the city.
And finally, I guess what I would ask is if you had to look at major infrastructure projects, bridges, roads, I like a light rail from Bucks to Center City to the airport. But as we start to determine which of those projects we're going for, who's making that determination and who's doing the mapping to inform council members as to, oh, by the way, there's going to be a bridge closed for 2 years in your district.
Sorry. So in terms of deciding on projects and which things we're going to be focusing on, we have a team of folks here in the managing director's office as well as the mayor's policy office that is always reviewing projects and always determining, what aligns with the mayor's priorities, what aligns with council's priorities to ensure that we're investing in those projects that make the most sense for our residents. So I'll leave the second part of the question to Rob. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
So school,
Oh, sorry. I apologize. Not used to a mic. Did you
the
hear
school
my?
to paycheck
Yes.
opportunity, and how do we negotiate that with the trade schools, trade unions, and getting them funneled? Because we have, as you just mentioned, a shortage in skilled labor. And if we can't find them, we should grow them. And right out of the at-risk population that we're talking about today that are right now not looking at that as a way of life. How do we integrate that into the prosperity of these projects?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say that our Office of Children and Families, as well as our Commerce Department, are working closely together for workforce development and ensuring that our students are receiving the opportunities that they need to fulfill sort of the future of Philadelphia and fulfill these jobs. But I will look to, perhaps Vanessa Garrett-Harley, our Deputy Mayor for Office of Children and Families, to talk a little bit more specifics about what we're doing to bring those opportunities directly to students.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. I just have a quick point of clarification regarding Councilmember Jones's question and the impending answer that we are slated to receive. Are we talking about specific city employment opportunities? Or are we talking about overall relative to the infrastructure projects?
So I'm talking about both.
Okay, because you brought up the Office of Workforce Development. So for a point of clarification, if you could also, I think it'd be more appropriate to have someone from OHR or Workforce Development talk about the positions that have been changed, the job specifications that have been changed to match the CTE programs. There are a number of positions that have been changed. Those specs will meet the graduates of these CTE programs. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
And you're absolutely right, Councilwoman, and I'll ask Mike Z to come up too, to be able to expound upon that as well. You can start.
So, good morning, Council President and Council members. It's Vanessa Garrett-Harley, Deputy Mayor for the Office of Children and Families. I just start. Good morning, Councilman. I'll just start and give a brief answer and then turn it over to Mike to answer Councilperson Gilmore Richardson's questions that I don't have those answers more specifically, but we do work very closely we are working closely with the School District of Philadelphia as well as our Commerce Department, particularly around trying to expand the CTE or those types of vocational programs, looking at different schools, expanding those vocational programs, and hopefully trying to tie them in to a pipeline to city employment. We know that college is not necessarily the answer for everyone, but for many of these young people certainly can develop the skill sets while they are in school to be able to fill many of the jobs that we have a need for. Also trying to work with Community College of Philadelphia to develop some additional pipelines and doing that in conjunction with the Cato Scholarship. So, that helps pay for tuition fees, cost of living, everything else that you may need to go to college. It fills in the gaps after other financial aid in order to develop some more specific pipelines for young people to fill in specific job apps. But as to the actual specs that have already been changed, I'll turn it over to Mike C.
Good morning, Council Presidents and members of Council. Mike Zakagny, Director of Office of Human Resources. Yes, we've been working on looking at specs over the last several years. I can't name every single one, but I believe we've had about 100 where we've made modifications to create other career paths for applicants to get in. Something that we talked about even pre-pandemic, the fact that a college degree acts as a barrier for many of our applicants, and we got to rethink that. So we have been doing that. We're going to continue to do that. As per skilled trades positions, we aligned all of our positions, all of our entry-level positions with CTE completion. So students coming out of the CTE programs now qualify immediately upon graduation for our trades helper position, which is our entry-level class for all of our trades positions. Now, to be completely transparent, we're still struggling with getting students to really engage and proceed through the process. We get a lot of applications, and sometimes they don't always complete the process. So as we build up our recruitment team, one of the things that we will be doing is working with the various offices in the city as well as the school district to sort of hold hands more with the students so that we provide additional support as we go through this. The other thing I'd like to add is not only trying to create those pathways for students, and I think we've hired like 2,000 public school students over the last couple of years. I forget how many years. I can't remember if it's 2 or 3. But we're also looking internal. So one of the things that we want to do when we have funding in this year's budget, we're finally got a RFP that we'll be putting out, is we also want to give opportunities for our current employees. So as we bring students in, we know we have to grow our own in many of these positions. So we also want to do a pilot program on identifying positions perhaps in labor, semi-skilled laborers, of people who would be interested in having these career changes and moving into more skilled trades positions so that we can give those opportunities there. And of course, some of the things that we've discussed in the committee meetings will also hopefully help us be able to create a more focus on workforce development, not only with outward facing with students coming in from the school districts, but also inward facing with some of our own employees.
Mr. President, I just know we started with CETA program back in our day, and some of those individuals, individuals are retiring from city jobs today. All you have to do is look at the water department. Some of the guys I came up with are citizens as coaches and mentors because of these opportunities. And I think this is the best way to attack some of the at-risk people that might be prone to gun violence by giving them a job.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you. You know, I'm sorry, this gentleman from HR.
Sorry, you want Mike to say?
Mike. You know, I just have a question for you. Actually, I was thinking about a point of information from the last question. Did you say that we were removing, like for city jobs, that we were removing some of the barriers, such as requirement for degrees, I guess, 4-year degrees?
We're not actually removing them. What we're doing is creating other pathways. So we may not necessarily remove, you can qualify for this job with a college degree, but what we're trying to do is create other pathways so that people can get in with additional experience.
Have we thought about following suit from the work that Governor Shapiro did, which was releasing, I think it was something like 60,000 jobs that were requiring, a 4-year degree, and saying that these jobs do not require if you have a level of experience or something of that sort. Have we thought about that? Is that something that we're seriously considering? Or?
We're looking at creating a greater promotional campaign for the city of Philadelphia. It certainly could be something that we look at. Right now, I believe 80% of our jobs or our positions are filled with positions that don't require degrees. So I think the state mentioned 92%. We're not there. And there are certain positions that will never get there on, engineers, healthcare, and so forth. But yes, we have to, I think, do a better job of saying what we have to people, and that's one of the things we're doing. I think I shared last year, we finally have some staff that will be focused on recruitment out of the Office of Human Resources. It's the first time that we've had dedicated staff in It's a long time, and I've been here for a while. So that's part of what their responsibility is going to be. We're actually bringing on a communications director, and they're going to help us not only message information out, but actually look at some of our internal documents, sort of like our job postings and things like that, which can be a bit thick at times to get through. So we're looking at those pieces too.
Okay.
So yes, we do try to promote that, hey, you don't need degrees. And we're doing it also with promotional positions. There was a position that I just saw, a real property supervisor, where we changed the requirements and received an additional 14 applicants. And that was significant because we don't have a lot of positions for that. So we're looking at that not only with what we call open and competitive positions, bringing people into the city, but also promotional positions.
Okay, okay. Thank you. I think that was my only question for you. I just wanted to follow up on the other questions that were raised. Thank you. And actually, I wanted to go back to something else Councilman Jones mentioned earlier, around the lengthy backlog on projects here in the city of Philadelphia. And I had a question actually for Ann Fadulin. Because as these projects, you know, I think pre-pandemic, as projects were lengthy here in the city of Philadelphia, it was almost kind of like, well, that's just the way it is. It takes a long time, you know, like, not to say that that's right under any circumstance, but it was kind of like, okay, well, this is the process and it's taken forever. But the problem now with that same thought process is that projects that are lengthy are costly. And so, as you know, because of, and we've had a few conversations about supply chain issues where, you know, the price of materials, the price of labor. We had a $10 million project to rebuild Barrett Playground in the city's Logan section, which went from 10 to 15 to $17 million. And so, you know, there's a gap. And so with all of these projects that we are working on now and other, you know, things that are in the pipeline, what is the city going to do about closing that gap as we talk about the 300-step process that Councilman Jones mentioned earlier? What are we going to do about the gap that now happens when you have a 300-step process or a 200-step process or a 100-step process or whatever it is now?
Yeah, so my name is Ann Fadulin. I'm Director of Planning and Development for the City of Philadelphia. I can't speak a lot to specifics about Parks and Rec projects and things like that. Maybe the Parks and Rec, but I would say just in general, I think what often happens with the projects that, for example, our department works on is there's local dollars that go in, but they're also dependent on other sources of dollars that are often very highly competitive and unfortunately take quite some time in order to put that full capital stack together in order to move those projects forward. And so you're exactly right. In the interim, we see cost of materials go up, cost of labor go up, all of those things, right? So, for example, when we do our tax credit projects, we used to have a maximum subsidy of $2 million. We now have a maximum subsidy of $3 million. However, we're still seeing projects take a long time. When they get to the point where they've now secured their tax credits, they oftentimes then put the project out to bid, and of course the big prices come in higher than everybody had anticipated. What happens then is we have them send all their information to us and we work with them. So we oftentimes put in additional dollars even over and above what has been approved in order to get those projects to closing. That being said, that initial time when we give them the dollars, it all comes through a competitive process. But once they've secured the rest of the dollars, if they come back, and we usually work in cooperation with the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Association. So we figure out what we can do, they figure out what they can do. Sometimes we find some savings for them, and so we try to work it together so that those projects get done. But yes, they do take an inordinate amount of time because that capital stack is really complicated.
Right. And I understand that. Listen, I get that. But there's a cost to that now. I think before, you know, like I said, there wasn't the same level of cost to it. There's a real cost to, you know, the delays, the issues that, you know, that projects can't move. And so I really think that, you know, planning and just the city in general really needs to have a more robust, I understand that the number went from 2 million to 3 million to increase the gap funding, but the rates, like I said, I got a project that went from 10 million to almost 17 million. $2 million is not going to do it, and 3 million is still not going to do it. So I just think that, I just want to put it on your table, that that's something that we need for the administration to
Yeah,
look
and those
more.
are things that we're always looking at. Like you said, we went from 2 to 3, and now we're trying to we'll look back at all the projects that went to closing and say, okay, how much did it really take to get them there?
Okay.
And then reassess. So we are, always reassessing. And I will just say very quickly on the capital side, because a lot of those projects, not necessarily some of the ones you're talking about, but they do flow through, for example, the Redevelopment Authority, which still exists in form-ish, in order to expedite, right? So there was an effort to sort of standardize all the fire station kitchens, for example.
All what was
the
that?
fire station kitchen repairs, right?
Okay.
So that was like a standard thing. It was like, okay, this is what we're doing, and we're zipping through those. Window replacement at a bunch of facilities. Again, get a standard window supplier and boom, move them through. So there are sort of things that are in place between Department of Public Property. We have a relationship with Rebuild. We have our relationships with Parks and Rec about certain things that we are able to move more quickly through the Redevelopment Authority. The bidding is slightly different, or sometimes we can be the owner's rep or something like that in order to try to move some of these through. But you're right? The more delay, we're definitely seeing that cost go up.
Okay. And you're working on a solution for that?
Always.
Okay. And you hope to have some sort of resolution to the solution, to the problem?
Again,
what point?
let me just say, we're going to work on it until we get there, and we are working on it on a consistent basis because
Okay.
We want the same outcome you guys want.
Right. Because of the what I would perceive as an urgency of the matter, do you see that as being like a month, 6 months, a year? Like, do you have any sort of
It's
idea?
something we're always making updates to, and I think, again,
Sure.
it's working with the different departments about what is the scope.
Okay.
And making sure there's not scope creep as well, and just how do we systematize kind of development as a whole. And there's some of that we control, and there's other things we don't control, but we're always trying to set a big table to get all the parties in the room to move it forward.
Okay. Thank you, Ann. Thank you
Sure,
for
no
your
problem.
response.
Thank you, Member Bass. Chair recognizes Member Johnson.
One time?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple brief questions around, for me, the topic of the day, and I know we're addressing the issue of our drinking water, which I know for a fact will come to a efficient solution in addressing, but as the council president talked about and being on the phone with my colleagues earlier this morning, we lost the life of another young person, but this is consistent. We also lost another young man on the basketball court in Strawberry Mansion yesterday, and so we're seeing this day in, day out. And so I just have a couple questions around this issue of gun violence here in the city of Philadelphia and our overall strategy to address it. And so first, around the Office of Violence Prevention, I'm seeing in the budget that we have $13 million for the Community Expansion Grant Program, and that's $10 million less than FY2023 last year. And so I'm trying to get an understanding of, if this is a priority, why are we scaling back and supporting the boots on the ground organizations that are out there day in and day out trying to help young people not pick up guns in the first place? I remember several years ago that this wasn't even a priority inside this chamber when it comes to supporting boots on the ground organizations. And then when we did organize around this particular topic, the organizations who are actually doing the work in the community were getting up to $10,000 and then maybe $20,000. But after my colleagues and I rallied 2 years ago for a $100 million investment, right, we began seeing significant investments in those organizations. And so can you give me an idea of why we're scaling back the $10 million less in a time when we are truly in a crisis? And how will these organizations be impacted? Will some of their funding currently be reduced? Will organizations who are out there doing the work who didn't get a chance to receive grant funding through the last cycle, will they have an opportunity to apply for new funding? And then what are our metrics that we have been using to kind of do an analysis of the investments that we have been doing?
Good morning, council member. Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you for that question.
Good morning, Tumar.
Good morning. Morning, sir.
Good to see you.
Great to be seen. Thank you for that question, and I think you heard our chief of staff talk earlier about that being, violence prevention also being one of the mayor's priorities, in addition to council, and it should be just a priority that we all have as citizens of Philadelphia. Also want to thank Councilmember Thomas for having us do a moment of silence for the young man, Mr. Wheaton, who was murdered on his way to school today over what's going to end up being something very senseless and frivolous that in your and my time might have caused a little lunchroom scuffle, and maybe we was on a basketball court later that afternoon following each other hard. To your question, I think one of the things I want to acknowledge up front, and I'll have Erica Atwood, our senior director, sort of talk about in detail, around the commitment we're making towards the CEG program in particular. I think, as you all know, as we've been updating you, we took a lot of time to sort of stand that program up and implement that program. So this is a reflection of, even though we're crossing over fiscal years, a lot of that money hasn't been spent by our grantees. We've actually had to do time extensions for, I would probably say, about 20 out of 29 of the grantees who've been started that work, continue to do that work, but allowing them the time left to continue to do that work, because we didn't just start it July 1. They didn't start work July 1 and say, grants contract started July 1 and they're working to July 1 of this year. So that's a little bit of the discrepancy around what it looks like we're not putting in the same amount of money that we put in last year. We could always use, Rob notwithstanding, we could always use more funding for that and, for that particular program. But we do have a plan, and I'll have Erica detail it on how we're looking at, I would say, move forward with CEG, open opportunities up for some new grantees, for the grantees that have been doing satisfactory work, having them continue that grant. Some grantees might want to continue doing the same thing they're doing. Certainly that's a different process than a grantee that might say, I have a new idea for something I want to be doing, or a grantee who haven't received that funding to then resubmit or submit for the first time for that funding. So it'll be those opportunities. So I'll kick it over to Erica Atwood to talk a little in detail about our plans there.
Good morning, everyone. Erica Atwood, Senior Director for the Office of Policy and Strategic Initiatives for Criminal Justice and Public Safety. Good morning, Council Member. And so as it relates to CEG process, we are in the process of asking our current grantees to submit renewals. And so tell us what worked about what you want to do. Tell us how you want to continue that work in the communities that you've been working in. How much money do you need to continue this work that we know is having an impact in a culturally competent way in communities, Black and brown communities that need the services the most, that are being facilitated by trusted organizations. With new applications, once we get through allowing our current grantees that have been doing this good work to submit their applications, we'll be reviewing them for renewals. We know that they're going to come across in different funding levels. Some will need more money, some will need less, because during this process, we've also developed their infrastructure or their capacity as organizations. So we've begun to strengthen them through our technical assistance as well as fund them, not just throw money and saying good luck. With our new applications, to your point, and we've been talking about this kind of over this process, is, okay, you didn't make it in the first time. Here's an opportunity now that we're going to open up next month for other organizations that did not get funded in the first round, or grantees that want to do a new project or pivot their program or do a new program. We're going to allow you that opportunity to apply for that. And so that's kind of the renewal and the new phase. In terms of metrics, what we're looking at right now, and we'll have our evaluation of CEG at the end of May. We're expecting that, and we're on track to get that evaluation of the impact and the process of this program. But what we're going to talk about in terms of the metrics of the grantees is, Who are you serving? Are you truly serving those at the highest risk of violence? Where are you serving? Are you doing it in our neighborhoods that are most vulnerable to gun violence? And then are you matching our funding priorities? And so just for the record, our funding priorities are mentorship, safe havens, trauma-informed care, and restorative justice. We know that if community-based organizations are focused on those efforts, they will help not only young people, but young adults as well, who are at the highest risk of being involved in gun violence.
All right, and I'm gonna wrap up because I'm saying time, and I'll have my other questions for the second round. So I'm an advocate of expanding this process, and so I'll be advocating with my colleagues to make sure that, particularly for the CEG program, that we should be still moving forward, expanding it and looking at multi-year investments in organizations, because again, how we got here is based upon years and years and years of disinvestment in black and brown communities. As a result, we see poverty. As a result, we see gun violence. As a result, we see our young people just getting involved in all things that are negative as opposed to things that are positive. And although we have to take a comprehensive approach in addressing this issue, the prevention aspect and addressing the trauma aspect plays a major role in us solving this issue long term. So it won't be 8 years under another administration and we're still at the same table having the same conversation. And so I want to continue advocating on that multi-year aspect and making sure that even as organizations spend down the funding, right, we're making a significant level of investment and encouraging those who are on the ground to continue doing the work that they're doing so they can be an ally in this effort in saving our young people. And so thank you for your responses.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Member
Chair.
Johnson. Before we recognize Member Thomas, in addition, on the piggyback of what my colleague just said, there are organizations that have had legacy contracts, the JEVs of the world and others that need to be apples to apples, and even though they're much bigger, around longer, what is their effectiveness, and is there some shifting that might be done to reinforce the budgets of the smaller upcoming groups? And with that, Chair recognizes Member Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to the administration. I'm going to ask that answers be a little brief because I want to try to get in a few questions. I don't have no questions for y'all. I want to try to get in a few questions during this first round. First, of course, starts with youth and young people. As it was said earlier, we have a serious incident, another one, not just last night, but as well as this morning, dealing with a young person. Councilmember Johnson talked about intervention-based dollars, specifically earmarked for gun violence. What I didn't hear was anything around prevention-based initiatives. I'm not talking about parks and recs, right? I work with the commissioner all the time. I'm talking about innovative prevention-based initiatives where we can make sure that as the weather gets better, that we have something positive for young people to do. So can somebody just give me maybe a 30-second response to specifically looking at prevention-based initiatives to assure young people have something positive to do in the summertime?
Yes, I'm going to ask Vanessa Garrett-Harley, our Deputy Mayor for the Office of Children and Families, who's been working hard on summer programming for kids.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Councilmember Thomas.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor.
We convened a summer planning work group. That group is multi-agency or multidisciplinary, but some of the prime folks there are the police department, our Office of Violence Prevention and Criminal Justice and Public Safety, my office at OCF, DHS, DBH, the Free Library, pretty much anybody in the city that might have some programming around kids, because we want to make sure we have one comprehensive program. One of the things that we in particular look at, though, at DHS under our prevention arm, particularly in the juvenile justice arena, we have a number of programs that we're looking at, and we have added some additional money and enhanced, because we want to make sure that our young people have some positive places to be, and not just outside or necessarily on the corner for those kinds of programs. We have also added some additional funding to PAL so that the hours can be extended. They'll be able to be open until 9 p.m. The rec centers will also be open late during the week and also open on weekends now. They've already opened a number of them on Saturdays, and we're also extending to open some of them on Sundays. So we're trying to extend programming, both timing as well, to a number of them. And as you know, we have the community evening resource centers that are open. We now have 4. We'll have 2 more we're standing up by June so that they'll be available for the summer. They're in different parts of the city, but they're open from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m., which are some of the prime hours that young people might be outside, and they do a lot of positive programming.
So I would just ask 2 things. Number one, can I be a part of that work moving forward? Because we do have some
Sure.
ideas and some organizations
Absolutely.
that we do great work. And number 2, I would also ask, and I sent this same text to the chair of the school board as well as Mr. Bethel, can we huddle around travel to and from school? I don't think that that's necessarily a superintendent thing. I think us as a city need to really do a deep dive on what happens between 7 and 9 when children are traveling to school, as well as between 3 and 5 when children are traveling home from school. So I just would ask, maybe can we do a deeper dive around those 2 areas so we could put together some immediate action plans to address some of those situations, if that's okay.
We absolutely can do that, and I'll just say, not speaking for police because I know that they're here, but we work very closely with police, and police have school zones. They are very, very concerned about what's happening to our young people, as we all are traveling to and fro, and so there are areas where we have extended coverage and other things.
I don't think this is a police thing. I think that we need something innovative besides just a police presence. We can't ask police to do everything.
Understood.
So in my mind, I think that we need to supplement something else.
But what I'm
something
trying
we've
to
never
say
seen
to you is
before.
that it's not just police. It's police. It is from the Office of Violence Prevention. There's a number of us all working together to try and make sure we do what you're saying, but we can include you.
So I think what we would like is to be included in that. I see Councilmember Johnson has a...
Understood.
As a point of information, I was
Okay,
trying
that
to
freezes the time.
I didn't want to catch you mid-word.
Please, Bob, thank you.
Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
It's just a point of information and support for my colleague. But, you know, people see a lot of work publicly, but also behind the scenes, having a conversation, and we can also make sure Councilman Thomas is a part of it with Erica Atwood regarding the Safe Paths /Corridors program with the school district, but partnering with Town Watch Integrative Services and kind of expanding, because that's who do the actual training for volunteers that actually make sure our young people are safe going to and from. And Joe, just from a level of support for Councilman Thomas, just wanted to provide that level of information just for clarity and support, transparency.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, colleague. Appreciate you having my back. You guys talked about $40 million for forensics, approximately $40 million for forensics between city and state. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to argue against that. I appreciate Commissioner Outlaw, Deputy Commissioner Dales, Inspector Haley, my captain in the 35th, Captain Massey. All of those folks are great. We have to do a better job supporting them. I'm for the $40 million, but my concern is just 2 years ago, I sat with Captain Overwise virtually, and that's when the hit and run crisis started. And Captain Overwise told us exactly what was needed to help address the hit and run crisis, and the technology that Captain Overwise requested didn't come for another 2 years after that, if it's here at all. We've told it's here, but you know, that's another story. When we looked at the driving equality legislation, the technology that was needed to report the data around that still hasn't come. So I'm concerned about, you know, us sitting here saying that we're going to put $40 million in the forensics. Is that going to happen? Are we going to see the results? Not when will the money go? I've learned how to word questions now. When will we see the actual outcome of a forensics lab? Because in my experience working with the administration as well as the police department, the things that we agree upon today sometimes don't come to fruition until years later. And for the crises that we have right now around hit and runs, around homicides, you know, we can't wait for those things. So that's one question, because my time is going to run out. My second question same group of folks around SEPTA. I agree 100% with what we want to do with SEPTA, but to add more people to SEPTA without a plan around safety, I think is somewhat irresponsible. So those two things will be how I'll close out my first round of questions, and Council President, you could tee me up for the second round as well.
Before that, Councilwoman Brooks, did you have a point of information on the earlier question?
Yeah, it was a part of Councilmember Thomas's question, but I can wait. It was about Parks and Rec, so.
Okay.
I can
You'll be
wait for
two.
my
You'll be two up. You'll be after third person in. All right. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning.
morning.
Thank you, Council President. Council member, in response to you, and try to be really brief, in response to your first question around the forensics lab. So we're working through right now with public property, the Office of Planning and Development, PIDC, on putting up a scope and put together a scope for the lab and getting the RFP out on the street. We anticipate doing that this year, we anticipate having an RFP or having that process started within the next month or so. It's for us to sort of identify a site and then, do whatever we need to do in terms of a process to select a developer. Construction on that project likely won't start until 26, but it'll be just like a construction project, right? Because this is us sort of putting together.
2026?
Yeah, 2026. So this is us putting together brick and mortar lab. I mean, similar to the process that we put together around the police headquarters, similar to other construction projects that we putting together in the city, is sort of floating on that timeline. As it relates to some of the technology things you mentioned, I can say that accident investigation data, and I'm not going to be able to name the particular device that they have. I believe we purchased 2 during the last budget cycle, and that should be in police's, in Captain Overwise and those folks' sort of use. It should be in their possession and being used. I don't know if any of that technology purchase got caught up in sourcing needs or just, the way stuff has been sort of, the supply chain has been sort of affected since 2020. But noted for what you say in terms of how long it takes to buy stuff, how long it takes to put up stuff. But we're working our behinds off to try to put together the RFP for the forensics lab and getting that on the street as soon as possible. Because there's a lot of funding that came from this body, so grant funding that came from the state as well. So we're really looking forward to spinning that up.
And the last question was SEPTA.
Yes. Yeah, so regarding SEPTA and regarding safety on the SEPTA system, obviously we are just as concerned as many of you for the safety of our residents and for consumers who are riding SEPTA. We work very closely with SEPTA law enforcement, with our own law enforcement partners to provide safety, cleaning, et cetera, for our stations and for our riders on the SEPTA systems. But we do believe that additional investment in the SEPTA system can only help the situation. So that's why the Kenney administration has chosen to put this in the proposal to really underscore not only the importance of the transit system for our residents, but also to improve ridership, to improve cleanliness, to improve safety, all of these things that we're all looking for in our transit system.
Thank you, Council President. I will say in closing that we're definitely going to need a little more around a lot of stuff, but definitely around SEPTA so that we are moving forward. Not today. I know we'll do a SEPTA day, but I just want to tee folks up to let them know when we do discuss SEPTA, that's going to be in-depth conversation. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Next up, we have Councilwoman Gauthier. Wait a minute. What do you see? I'm sorry, Council.
Regarding SEPTA.
Yeah, because every time,
I can come
just
back.
to explain what's going on.
I can come back.
Yeah, because every time you do a point of information, it kind of juggles the whole thing. And
that's fine.
Kind of throwing us off a little bit, but it's okay. We'll get through it. Councilwoman.
Thank you, Council President. I'd like to start with some comments and then move on to my questions. Last budget cycle, with the support of my colleagues, I launched the Just Services PHL campaign in an effort to make targeted investments to improve the quality of life for all Philadelphians. These investments included $3.2 million, an additional $3.2 million to provide L&I inspectors with city vehicles so that they could respond to complaints more quickly, and so that we could also boost inspector recruitment and retention efforts. An additional $1 million for street lighting improvements to increase public safety. An additional $2 million to combat illegal dumping. An additional $5 million to expand CLIP's capacity, and an additional $16 million in operating and capital dollars for traffic calming over the course of the 5-year plan to maintain safe streets for our residents. These investments were desperately needed, but we must continue to direct even more of our city resources towards quality of life investments in a way that will make communities safer and allow every Philadelphian to thrive. And that brings me to my first set of questions, which are for L&I. Over the last year, my district has received dozens of calls regarding nuisance properties and establishments, including one residential property that has been tied to multiple instances of gun violence and drug activity, and a smoke shop on 40th Street where a teenager was shot and killed just a few short weeks ago. And so oftentimes when we're dealing with these problem properties or nuisance establishments, we're learning that L&I is citing and fining, sometimes over the course of years, and directing these communications to property owners and business owners that really don't care to respond. And so my question is about the multi-agency effort that is described in the 5-year plan. I'd like to learn more about this effort that L&I intends to take to inspect nuisance establishments in the upcoming fiscal year. And specifically, if you could talk about which agencies will be involved in the joint inspections of nuisance establishments, what will be the process once an establishment is found to be in violation, and when do violations get escalated to the law department for prosecution? And then I also would love for someone from the administration to talk about the role that the city's law department plays in this process, and how we plan to strengthen the law department's ability to prosecute bad actors.
Good morning, Council President. Ralph DiPietro, Department of Licenses and Inspection Commissioner. Council member, thank you for the question, and particularly for the reference to the vehicles. They've been delivered, they're in place, they're working now, and it's been an absolute game changer already. So thank you for that. With respect to L&I's roles with nuisance properties, there's a couple different things that we're doing here. We realize one of the biggest issues is the delay in time, and so we've actually taken a little bit of a different tack. So the Nuisance Business Committee is a committee that's made up of several different city departments. It consists of L&I, the law department, police department, state liquor control and liquor control enforcement, health, and various other city agencies at times will sit on the committee. And the goal it has to discuss these sort of problems is a much larger, broader aspect. And so one of the changes that we've talked about, it's really twofold. It's proposing some changes to the nuisance business law that will allow, or the nuisance business, Councilmember Bass's ordinance, that will allow us to expand that to include businesses where there's violence as a result of their business practices. So the second part of that is we actually are beginning the process of sealing businesses. That's not something we've done in a really long time. It's something that's done in other places around the country, and it seems to have the necessary effect. So these are a couple things that we're looking to do more immediately. And when I say sealing, I mean actually padlocking the entrances to businesses so that they can't be occupied relatively easily. And it also makes it a little bit easier for the police department to see what's going on, because they can tell if the seals have been removed, and that's something that they may want to look at. So there's a couple different things that we need to do in terms of changes to the ordinances and changes to the process. Now, won't speak necessarily to the law department issues, although we do recognize that the partnership with law department has been invaluable and very necessary. Very often, a lot of those things we want to do, like physically sealing properties, may require us to go before a court and have that done as part of a legal action against the property owners. Not every business can be sealed without affecting other lawful. You can imagine if you have an entrance where it's a business and there's like apartments up above, obviously we wouldn't be able to seal those. So there's a couple different things that we need to do, but we recognize that we definitely need to streamline and cut down the amount of time it takes between we receive the complaint about the nuisance and there's some demonstrable effort to stop it.
Does somebody want to speak to the law department?
Sure. Good morning, Councilmember Andrew Richmond, Chief of Staff to City Solicitor Diane Cortez for the City of Philadelphia Law Department. I apologize that Ms. Cortez is unable to join us today. But we have increased enforcement against individuals who operate their businesses in manners that reduce the quality of life in neighborhoods, and we've worked closely with our license and inspections to work on these cases and to advise on how to best use the police powers through filing emergency injunctions against businesses that ignore those cease operations orders.
I appreciate the crucial work that the law department does. We've been able to work very successfully with the law department on a number of issues. But can you speak to your capacity to prosecute these cases that are, moving forward from LNI? What capacity do you currently have as it relates to the amount of bad actors that we really need to be going after?
Sure. Yeah, and you'll hear more about this next Tuesday when the law department's up here for our budget hearing. But we in the last few years we've worked to increase the capacity of our code enforcement unit with the staffing and training and to help work with our partners here to work on these types of cases. But we have sought, I believe in this budget cycle, for increased funding for these type of issues, to work on these type of issues.
I hope a lot of my colleagues will join in pushing for that request. Some of these establishments are helping our neighborhoods to become really dangerous places, and we need to be able to enforce in a way that helps all businesses to be good citizens and maintain the safety and the quality of life of our neighborhoods.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Phillips.
Thank you, Council President, and also members of our viewing public, and thank you to all the commissioners who have given their time today to answer questions that are important to the City of Philadelphia. I have a number of questions surrounding some of the topics that came up earlier, but I want to start off with questions centered on some initiatives that are important to our district in the 9th. So I see that in FY2024 capital budget allocated $2.5 million for traffic control improvements. Does this mean spending for traffic calming measures specifically, or are we using operating funds for that? I ask because this coming Thursday, Council is set to adopt Bill number 230103, which is a bill that I introduced that authorizes the Streets Department to install traffic calming measures in and around schools and private schools, charter schools, pretty much all the schools in the City of Philadelphia. So I want to ensure that we have the funds to implement this legislation because our children deserve safety, and pretty much everybody on City Council is in agreement on the fact that we need to have speed calming measures in front of our schools. So I just want to make sure that we have the support that's needed.
Yes, and I would call up Chris Pahalski from the Office of Transportation Infrastructure and Sustainability to speak more about specifics related to traffic calming measures and the investments that we plan on making in FY24.
Right, and as he comes forward, thank you. What I do know is that I'm hoping that we have even a larger team, because the Streets Department this particular year was focused a lot on sanitation, which is also a big issue that we need to focus on. But we also, people in the 9th District in particular, not just around our schools, but in general, want traffic calming measures pretty much throughout our district. So hoping that we can answer that question as well.
Good morning, Council Member. I'm Christopher Pahalski, Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Otis. Thank you for your question. Yeah, we have been working together with the Streets Department to define the procedures and working on an Operations Transformation Fund grant to re-engineer the process of residents selecting traffic calming devices on their streets to try to reduce some of the barriers for that. And in addition, working with the Streets Department to come up with a plan to spend the additional money that was added by council in the current year budget to get that implemented. And I've got Rich Montanez up here to speak to that.
Good morning, Council Member. My name is Richard Montanez. I'm Deputy Commissioner of Transportation. This year, the Streets Department is planning to spend $2 million on traffic calming in the city of Philadelphia. We're currently putting out a strategic plan to be covering the entire city. And then next year, there's another $2.5 million for Vision Zero projects and $500,000 in the capital budgets for traffic control devices. The traffic control devices are actually traffic signals, traffic controllers, things like that.
Thank you. And just for my time, are we doing work to address the concern around staffing to make sure that we have enough staff? We have the funding, but have enough staff from the Sanitation Streets Department to be able to implement this as much as possible?
So I had a union meeting this morning. We are meeting with the school districts, trying to get young people to come into school. We're looking at a partnership similar to the way fleet management does, where you can get electrical training in the public school system and then roll right into the Philadelphia Streets Department. So we are working on programs like that to bring people in to work for the city.
Thank you. Go ahead, sorry.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gaudier for a point of information.
Thank you. I'm very supportive of what the councilman is trying to do, and I just wanted to point out that last year in the FY23 budget, we won $11 million for traffic calming, which was huge because this is one of the biggest requests we get from our constituents. And somehow, during the transfer ordinance process, we lost $4 million of that. That related to both operating and capital, capital expenditures. And so I just wanted to make sure that that context was on record, because we continue to deny the bulk of requests that are coming from our neighborhoods for traffic safety.
And I just want to thank the council member for that point of information.
Sure.
That was important.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman.
I just have one more question. Is that
Sure.
okay? I'm going to tie it all in. Town Watch, and I'll say the rest for my second round questions, but in our neighborhoods, I love with our Town Watch. First of all, let me just mention Eric Bryce of the 35th Town Watch. He's phenomenal with advocating for Town Watches, and also in the city of Philadelphia, Town Watches are becoming something that is more popular these days. What are we doing to help our neighbors understand and support them with the resources needed to get Town Watch? Because right now, what I'm understanding is that it's at a request level. How do we maybe have more an advocate program where we begin to speak with block captains, knock on doors, block by block, where we're actually trying to unite our neighbors with the Town Watches so that we're looking after each other? So that could be a thing that we work together, because the police department, what I'm from Constable Captain Massey in the 35th, is always saying, we need people. We need people to help out with this. So I want us to see how we can rev up the Town Watch and encourage people on a leadership level to make sure that that's something that we can do as a violence prevention effort.
Thank you for that question, Council Member. Town Watch Integrated Services falls under the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Cluster. To answer your question, one, we are increasing our staffing in Town Watch, and so we have more capacity. Additionally, we are working with, I have a director of community engagement within my cluster who is focusing on building those relationships specifically with block captains to get information out about the services that exist, not just with Town Watch, but for for all of our cluster writ large. That is part of what will be, again, our community engagement meetings. We did our first round, which was a listening tour, so we wanted to hear from. In the second round, we're going to be able to share information and opportunities and supports and services that exist inclusive of Town Watch. And so that is our spring community engagement meetings are beginning this April. We're also looking at how do we even innovate who we're contacting and how we're contacting them, because to diversify the age groups that are engaged in Town Watch. And so we're looking at how we're developing youth engagement strategy, and so there will be multi-generational participation in Town Watch. And so those are all the things that we are focused on now, regardless of how this budget process pans out. We are already working towards that.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Councilman. Next up, we have Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson. Saw the way you were looking at me, Councilman. I was going to call your name even if you weren't up next.
Thank you, Council President. I wanted to start off this morning. Thank you, Rob. You must have known. I wanted to start off this morning talking about the presentation that you all gave to Council and the projected contributions to the Budget Stabilization Reserve. You know that when we talked about this bill, we agreed upon the contributions will be based on the Q2 numbers around our year-end fund balance projections, and that the contribution amount will be a minimum of 0.75 of unrestricted general fund revenues when the threshold is triggered, and that there will be a minimum of a 1% contribution when the projected year-end fund balance exceeds the city's internal goal of 8%. In the 5-year plan that you all shared with Council, the year-end fund balance projection as a percentage of revenues is 8.7%. So in FY24, and FY25 is 8.2%, and FY26 is 4.3%. So the stated BSR contribution in the presentation is $42 million, both for FY24 and 26, and then $171 million for 25. I need you to explain to me how you calculated these contributions. Why is it such a big increase in FY25 when the year-end fund balance projection is roughly the same as 24? And why is the FY26 projected contribution the same as 24, even though the year-end fund balance projection for 26 is half of the FY24 projection and in the category for the 0.75 contribution?
Yeah, so the fund balances that you're seeing in the plan and in the presentation are the fund balances after those contributions are made. So if you'd been looking at the fund balances before the contribution, that 25 fund balance would be another 125, whatever the number was, higher. So it's the pre-contribution number that drives that. And what we can do to kind of make that clearer is we can send you a document that shows what fund balances would be without the BSFR contribution, and then you'll see what's driving it.
That would be helpful, because you see how elevated it is in FY25. It just does not make sense on paper because of where we'll be. 24, 25, and 26 is about the same. For it to jump up in 25, would greatly impact our ability to invest in other things, and it does not make sense from the perspective of what we have discussed. And so I just wanted to make sure that it didn't have anything to do with sort of the federal funding ending in that timeline. I just wanted to get that on the record.
Yeah, and it partly does have to do with the federal funding, because the federal funding has to be allocated in our budget by 25, so that drives up our fund balance because we have to show that revenue.
If you could submit that information to the chair, that'll be exceedingly helpful for the work that we have to do behind the scenes. I also wanted to talk about our sort of projections in general and our financial outlook. And, I've talked about this back to 2020, even before COVID. But over the last few weeks, the yield on our 2-year Treasury note has moved 0.3 to 0.7 points each day, which is as much as 15 times higher than average over the past decade. On March 13th, we saw the biggest drop since 1982. Financial experts are saying that this level of volatility is extreme, but they are mixed on whether this signals a recession is looming. How are you all tracking this? How are you tracking all of those changes, and how are we building all of this into our budget to ensure that we are prepared for any potential economic downturn?
So there are a few things going on. The recent kind of severe volatility relates to what happened in the banking sector.
Right.
We do not have a lot of exposure at the pension fund to Silicon Valley Bank or to Signature Bank. So the impact on us is really what it means for the larger economy, what it means for the markets in general. I think the Feds did a pretty good job of calming the markets down. And you were talking about those big spikes in interest rates. They've come back down as people, investors got calmer. And the market has also been relatively calm. Today it's kind of flat. So I think, unless another bank goes, that immediate hit has probably kind of leveled out.
Okay.
We had a bigger question, which was, what are we looking at in the kind of overall economy? So, as I think we've talked about before, we deal with an outside econometric firm. We get input from them. We rely on the expertise of people who work in revenue and budget. We do a meeting that the Fed hosts with regional economists so they can look at what we're thinking. Based on all of that, we do expect that there'll be a downturn, probably relatively early this year, and that there'll be slow growth after that. So that's built into our projections, particularly hitting really probably the first year of the plan, and then some moderate growth after that.
Sure. Okay, well, thank you for that response and for all of your work that we've been able to do together. I want to circle back to a couple questions that have been offered by our colleagues and go back to the nuisance business question specifically for licenses and inspections, recognizing that this is one of the issues that I have worked on with you all very, very closely, even going out in the evenings to do inspections across the city for some of these nuisance businesses. But in your 5-year plan for licenses and inspections, it states that they intend to inspect 80% of nuisance properties within 2 weeks. Now, I've worked with L&I for 2 years, and Commissioner, you can attest to this. I've worked with you all on a weekly, daily basis around this issue, particularly around the drug paraphernalia stores. This is not always our experience, particularly in my office with the information that we keep with you all. So how do you all plan to resource L&I in a way that helps you not only with capacity, but with the staffing challenges? Because we know that with these nuisance businesses, sometimes you can't put a first level inspector into these roles. And because of the dangerous nature of what we've seen in a lot of these inspections, and Commissioner, you remember that one incident when we were out and we were surrounded by drug dealers closing down a store. And so this is serious work. So how are we building capacity to ensure that we can get to all of the locations, do the re-inspections, but also have the adequate staff that's trained and able to do this work in L&I to do this effectively? Because what we find is we'll submit a location, the re-inspection does not occur in the time that it's supposed to occur, and then we have to constantly try to get you all to go back out to a location, but we have to wait because you have to wait for the whole nuisance business task force. You have to work with law and health and PPD on all of this work. So if you could talk about the staffing challenges and capacity, because we really need to know how we need to invest to deal with this issue. Because what my colleagues are talking about are the residual challenges that we are facing as a result of these stores being open. And that's what we have to deal with from a gun violence perspective. Everybody is responsible for gun violence prevention and intervention. Every single department that comes before us. I want to hear from each of you how you all are going to be responsible for gun violence prevention and intervention, but specifically for L&I around the nuisance business issue that we've been working very closely on.
Good morning, Council Member. Thank you for the question. Ralph DePietro, Commissioner of Licenses and Inspections. There's a couple things that we're doing in terms of our nuisance business. Initially, some years ago, the nuisance task force from L&I was a singular unit There were 3 inspectors, a supervisor. We found that that model didn't necessarily work for a couple reasons. One, the inspectors got out of sync with the other inspectors of the department. It was very difficult to make sure that they were trained properly in many different ways. There was also a loss of oversight because they became very walled off and very difficult. So the way we've approached this now is to train a larger number of inspectors that work in our code enforcement division, and we pull them into the nuisance unit as the demand increases. Now, one of the challenges you've rightly pointed out, there is some coordination here because the inspectors themselves have raised a concern about their particular safety with respect to some of these businesses that we're looking at. And so we work with the police department in order to make sure that there's police presence whenever we're doing. And that's a little bit difficult because we're trying to align schedules. Priorities are different for different reasons. So that's been a pretty big challenge. I think that's something that we could certainly do a better job in terms of coordinating so that we can shorten the time between re-inspections. I think some of the other things that we're trying to do, one of the things that we're going to be rolling out in the next several days is a slight change in how we do very low-level complaint response. Governing is about priority. I know you folks know this. And so maybe the hope is that by changing around how we respond to some of those more low-level complaints, that we can reassign some of our staff, some of our seasoned staff to do the more difficult stuff, right. Specifically around, it's not technically difficult, but it's difficult in terms of who you're dealing with. We conduct far more technical inspections, fire safety inspections in very large buildings can be very technical, but the drug paraphernalia stuff is very difficult to do because there's a lot involved, and it has to be done correctly. And so we're looking to shift some staff around to improve that. And the other thing I think too, which will help, is being more, a little bit more aggressive with the resolution, sealing the businesses and then escalating them to the courts when an owner just doesn't comply. Our whole goal is to get the ones that really deserve to be in court in front of the judges. So I think those couple things that we're looking to put in place now will certainly help to get that time frame down. But I think it's important that there is some visual significance to it. There has to be a visual, a sealed building with the understanding that we're going to come back, we're going to monitor that, we're going to work with the police department to take that, to make sure that that's adhered to. I think that helps because it dissuades folks from thinking maybe it's worth selling drug paraphernalia. It simply isn't, and it won't be. It needs to be too costly to conduct that kind of business.
Sure. Well, I just want to thank you, Commissioner DePietro, for the work that we have been able to do together in shutting down the number of businesses we have shut down thus far, and for working with my office because of all the complaints we receive citywide. But I had to mention this. We need to know for this budget cycle how much in Class $100 licenses and inspections we'll need in order to get an adequate number of inspectors to do this work, whether it's moving some folks up into different positions and then hiring to bring in other lower level inspectors to deal with the other issues, and then also how we need to resource from a Class 100 perspective, the health department, law department, and everyone else who plays a role in this. We need a dedicated unit of folks that can do this work. Even from a PPD perspective, can we get 4 or 5 dedicated officers that only work with the nuisance business task force so that we don't have to go to a district to say, can you give us an officer tonight to go out with us to do this inspection and do this tour? Can we get a unit that'll just work with us on that? We need to know a number so we can get it in this budget cycle so we can address this issue this year. Thank you, Council President. I'll come back on the next round.
Thank you, Councilwoman. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Lozada.
Mr. President, I just want to piggyback a little bit off of what Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson just said. You've heard from me often since I've been here in the last 3 months around nuisance businesses, and even before arriving here, managing 3 corridors with Esperanza. And nuisance businesses are destroying commercial corridors and the work that commercial managers are doing every day. And so to me, it's super important to figure out how is it that they're able to operate with licenses that are grocery store licenses and very little of what they're selling in these establishments are groceries. And so how do we prevent or how do we change? What do we need to do? What do we need to change in order for them to be able to operate with an appropriate license? And when community stresses that they're nuisance, how do we effectively, quickly react to their call? And how do we partner with our counterparts across government, whether it be federal and state counterparts, to address some of what they're selling that is illegal? How do we do that?
Thank you, Councilman. That's actually a great question, because one of the delicate things about this is sometimes, and Councilmember Gilmore Richardson mentioned a particular property we were at once. Some of these are the actual only grocery store within the foreseeable area. Like when you get there, there is no other place to buy groceries. In fact, in the one example, there was a woman, as we were doing the seize operation, there was a woman coming with her cart. She was going shopping. To shut down that business entirely meant she no longer had a place to go shopping. So there's a real delicate balance between, do we close down the only place that actually sells like food, because they also sell this drug paraphernalia stuff. So the key had been, or the approach had been, hey, look, this kind of stuff breeds more problems. It breeds further issues for the neighbors, and so to try and get them to stop that. And so the balance is figuring out what's a legitimate grocery store, and very often the stuff they sell doesn't sell. It's really there. It's just there to sort of symbolize something else. It's attracting this other sort of element that we're seeing, and so it's not the products for sale, it's the behavior that's going along with it. So I think one of the things is we've got to attack the bad behavior, the repetitive behavior, the businesses that refuse to change in order to stop that. So approaching the behavior, I think, is a better approach rather than the actual products. Now, the products are good because that gives us the indicator that, like, look, there's something else going on here. In the example that I mentioned, we were able to get the owner to agree to just stop selling the stuff. Now, I don't know, I've not been back there, so I don't know how that's worked out, but we are very sort of conscious that some of these stores actually have a legitimate, there's places that are purely dedicated to paraphernalia sales. Well, those ones seem a little bit easier generally. Sometimes they're smoke shops, sometimes they're drug paraphernalia sales, but also very often, to your point, they are also legitimate grocery stores, and maybe the only one around for neighbors. So yeah, I think we probably need to increase the amount of personnel across the city that's available. I think we do have a plan to bring, Ellen and I will be bringing in a class of 40 inspectors. We had hoped to bring them in March. It looks like we probably won't get that done till May or June after we go through the interview and hiring process. And as I mentioned, the idea is they'll then take over for the staff that's already here. They'll handle the simpler sort of property maintenance type complaints and allow that staff to pivot over to the more significant stuff like the drug paraphernalia stuff, vacant and open properties, the stuff that's going on in Kensington where we can support in any way that we can, vacant and opens and other nuisance businesses. So there's a couple different things that we can do there, but I would agree that it does need to be a joint effort across city departments because there's a lot involved here, from violence to drugs and to many other things that we've seen, hence the reason why we're doing this in a joint effort to begin with. Our inspectors did reference that they're sort of uneasy about conducting these kinds of inspections alone.
Thank you.
Councilman Phillips, did you have a point of?
Our Councilwoman, Captain Gilmore Richardson, pointed out something really important about we have funds available and ready to support what Councilmember Lozada has mentioned around making sure that we are shutting down these nuisance businesses at all costs. Because the reality is, as we know, that if we work on this together, we will be able to make this a violence prevention effort. So the question that I have is, I heard you say we have, point of information.
No. Okay, good.
Okay, I just have a good comment. Quick comment. Can we just count on a plan, like out of this effort, so that a plan on how we can use funding, so we can make sure that we are collaborating and so forth. That's all. I just want to make sure that we can work on a plan for this effort because we know this is important, and I just want to see that coming forth for us. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilman.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes sense to loop in the citywide nuisance business committee because I think they have the best sort of approach to this because they're already comprised of all the city departments that do this sort of work. So yeah, absolutely. I think that we're happy to sort of have those discussions and honestly place whatever resources we need to help put an end to the problem.
Thank you. Councilwoman, you good?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Harity.
Thank you, Council President. My question is really an HR question. So we're short close to 1,000 police officers, close to 400 paramedics. I'd like to know what we're doing to try to incentivize some of these jobs. They have billboards on 95 says, be a Miami police officer, live on the beach, $20,000 signing bonus. We have to compete with stuff like that, and we have record shortages in every department. So my first question would be, are we looking at anything that we can incentivize to get these jobs filled? Also, I would like to know what the actual time frame is in our hiring. So from application to hire, what is the time frame? Because from what I'm understanding, I've talked to some people in different areas, and they tell me the problem is that we're interviewing people, getting their application, interviewing them, and the process is so long that they actually have other jobs before they get the job with the city of Philadelphia. So, we're short departments all over this city, and we have a surplus. So what, if anything, are we doing, and is there a plan to staff up, especially in our police and paramedics who are actually protecting and serving our citizens?
Thank you, Council Member. Mike Sicagni, HR Director for the city. And I would like to offer the opportunity also for police to come up and speak on this too, since they have a major recruitment unit within the department, but I can talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we're doing. One of the things, and the Council President mentioned this on the Recruitment and Retention Committee, there's going to be some recommendations that come out of that committee shortly. I don't know if I can go into detail on that right now, but there's going to be some things that will be directed directly at sort of police officer recruit and those things. So we're hoping to have some ideas coming out of that committee. It's been very helpful to have all the council members that were part of that committee involved in that and have a frank and open discussion. It was very helpful to us. The other piece on the hiring time, and I would want to get you some more detailed information.
Just to clarify, I understand that police, paramedics, inspectors take a little longer because they have to be trained. I understand that. My hiring, the time frame line was for normal everyday employees that we would be hiring. So sanitation, stuff like that. What's the time frame from application to getting a job with the city of Philadelphia?
So again, it really depends on the specific position, but our average to create a list within OHR, I believe right now is between 33 and 36 days from the time the announcement closes. We count from the time the announcement closes because some departments would like to restrict the amount of time that they announce it for 2 weeks. Others want to do it for 6 or 8 weeks. So it's really dependent upon the type of position and what type of recruitment effort. So once that announcement closes, on average, we can do it between 33 and 36 days. That's to get an average, to get a list established. Within the city, we have a bifurcated hiring process. So what we have is OHR that has to do a certain type of work. They create the eligible list, and then it goes to the departments that then have to go through another whole interview process. With the expanded rule, certification rule, where we've moved away from the Rule 2, that process is a little bit more structured and sophisticated for them. So we have detailed information on hiring times for various positions and also type of lists. For example, open and competitive, we have an idea of what the hiring time is for promotional lists. One of the things that we have been doing, and I mentioned this earlier, is where we can, we try to move to what we call T&Es so that we're not doing some type of objective assessment. That increases the time. if we have to give a test or a formal interview process, what we call an oral examination. So we've been looking at those things. So one of the things that I can do is share with the Council President's Office some of the data that we have on hiring times. You can see that in more detail, and we can have, I guess, a deeper discussion about that.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Krista Dahl-Campbell. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Organizational Services, and I'm happy to answer anything for recruitment. Is there something specific that you're...
I just would like to know how we plan on filling these positions. I'm actually concerned that not only are our citizens not safe, but our officers are not safe. Now, policing is just one aspect of it. Paramedics really is something for me. I have a heart condition. So when I'm told that we have 3 ambulances in my area, but no paramedics manning them, they're all EMTs, firefighters doing double duty because of the shortages, I of course am concerned. But I'm looking for a safety point, and I just want to know how we plan on filling these positions, how we plan on incentivizing to keep these people here, because people are stealing our employees, they're stealing our officers. And you know as well as I know, it takes a special person to become a police officer or a firefighter. You know what I'm saying? You got to want to do that. It's a thankless job, and it's dangerous.
Agreed. So the city of Philadelphia is fairly competitive with our salary when it comes to other major cities. Unfortunately, local townships pay a much higher rate, so sometimes we do lose individuals there. We are working to try and get more applicants, so we have a recruitment unit that looks to go around and target areas all throughout the city, colleges and fairs, as well as other areas, to try and bolster recruiting and get folks interested in joining the department. Once they apply, we have open houses. Unfortunately, we tend to lose a large number of applicants between the application process and the open house, and there's been a lot of discussion on how to improve on that. We're actively working on an applicant tracking system with a vendor to bring in to look at trying to close those gaps, working on technology features like texting individuals to keep them interested, to try and get them to come to our open house. Once they're at our open house, they have to do both a reading test and then a physical. Unfortunately, we lose a lot of people in that process as well. We're actively seeking ways to improve on the reading. We're looking at other tests that may be better suited, still having standards, but looking at more modern tests that other departments are using throughout the country. And then the physical, we actually are working to have individuals that are interested that may be struggling in that area train with our academy as well as our recruit unit to get up to snuff and be able to pass that test. But unfortunately, we do lose folks there. Then they go into a background where they have a psychological as well as a lie detector, and sometimes we lose individuals there as well. But we're working actively to try and get more folks in the process and to improve getting results of folks that join the process, getting and seeing them all the way through.
Yeah, now, would expanding like Police Explorers program help with any of that?
So we recently, if you remember, good morning or afternoon, everyone. Danielle Outlaw, Philadelphia Police Commissioner. We recently, last year, I believe it was, we not only lowered the entrance age in order to join, we also got rid of the college requirement. But one of the things that we recognized is that we were still losing our explorers when they aged out. We estimate that a cadet program, so it would be a next step after an explorer program, a police cadet program, if we started with about 30 police cadets, would cost about $1.5 million, and we're currently seeking external funds in order to pay that, or at least begin it as a pilot program. So that's also something that we're looking at, in addition to how we can expand our marketing and continue to work with other portions of the city to do exactly what you're talking about, as far as not only ensuring that we're more visible, but we're targeting the audiences that we want to, as far as who we're trying to recruit.
And that cadet that you said 1.5 million?
$1.5 million, yes.
1.5 million, that's not actually a lot of money to pay for safety. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Brooks. Then we'll have Councilman Driscoll, and we'll take a
There we go.
take a brief break.
Okay, great. So my questions are kind of focused around gun violence and prevention, and some of my colleagues had already mentioned before. We know in 2022, nearly a third of the 2,217 shootings took place in 3 North Philadelphia zip codes, 19134, 19124, 19140, where my family lives, and then over the last 2 days, at least 3 or 4 has happened in those same zip codes. And we know that these neighborhoods and communities have carried a legacy of disinvestment and redlining, discrimination, which is directly linked to the violence that impacts our city. To create communities that are resilient and to allow them to thrive, we need to target specific neighborhoods that experience the most violence with deep investments and then expand those investments across the city. So I'm glad to see that we're making investments to bring libraries to 6 days a week. And I saw in my own neighborhood library, I had to repost it because this is something I had been complaining about, and I saw we're open an extra day on the avenue, so I was excited about this. You know, a lot of my colleagues, we have been talking about this, about expanding supportive places where kids can socialize and learn on the weekends, because we know it's a powerful anti-poverty strategy. And this expansion of staff and hours, I want to know, is it going to be targeted first to the libraries and recreation centers in the areas most impacted by gun violence? And how are we determining right now when these library hours are going to expand? And can we do like libraries and Parks and Rec together?
Yes, and I see people coming up to help provide answers to that, but I will say that it is a priority of Mayor Kenny's to be able to provide additional hours at these locations so that our youth have safe and productive places to be on the weekends and the evenings.
Good morning, Councilwoman Brooks. How are you?
Good morning.
So we are trying to, over at the Office of Children and Families, to do everything strategically linked and aligned around the gun violence in the city, because we recognize that, of course, that's one of our, it's the #1 priority for everything and everybody. And so we all should be working together. I think one of you said that earlier. I think it was Councilwoman Gadier, around those issues. So as we are determining where we are opening up, very much so, looking at certain zip codes, very much so looking at the violence or number of shootings in certain neighborhoods, and a few other data points that we need. But I do have Kelly Richards, who's the director of the library, and Commissioner Lovell, who's the director of Parks and Rec, if you want more specific questions.
Good morning, Council and Council President. We're working hard over at the library. We have been in a difficult position over at the library for some years now, and we're working really hard at getting our libraries open. We've got 10 right now in our council districts that are open on Saturdays. We believe that by beginning of next school year, based on this budget process, that we will in the fall have all of our libraries open on Saturdays. Our hours, as we build up our staffing, we really much appreciate the fact that our budget has increased so that we can improve our staffing. We're somewhere now, based on the budget of our budgeted staff of about 900 and I believe 80 employees. We currently now are just under 725, somewhere around 720. We've got a little ways to go, but we're working hard so that we can now have a stable 5-day service without having all of our branches, half of our branches closing every day. So that's about where we are right now. We're building up, we're working hard, and trying to fill all of those vacancies.
Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Outlevel, Commissioner of Philadelphia Parks and Recreation. We're also working very hard to provide maximum services, 7-day-a-week service at our recreation centers. Thanks to the budget increase we received during this fiscal year of $2.5 million, we have been able to open, as of today, 65 recreation centers on weekends, on Saturdays, and 40 as of today on Sundays. We're opening more every weekend as we continue to staff up. Of course, hiring full-time staff is a struggle, but we have been hiring at a clip. We have literally hundreds of new program staff, full-time program staff members, recreation leader trainees, as well as recreation outreach workers who have started and will be starting with us over the next few months. We've also tried to be as creative as possible in bridging the gap to get as many rec centers open on weekends as possible, as quickly as possible. So we've extended some seasonal positions. So we've asked seasonal employees if they will work more hours and longer to support that, as well as offering overtime to keep some of those centers open on weekends as well. So we're trying to be creative until we're able to staff up to get all of our rec centers open on Saturdays and Sundays.
So I know that we had allocated additional money for staffing, and I know with the civil services and the hiring, to Councilmember Harity's point, what can we do to ensure that as you guys are hiring up to be at full capacity with existing money, that we are still making sure you're able to continue this 6 to 7 days a week services in the targeted areas? And I wasn't really sure if I heard clearly if the staffing of recreation centers and parks is specifically to areas that are targeted through gun violence, and is it a coordinated effort with I think it's Erica Atwood's department around that?
Yeah, thank you. My apologies for not answering that part of the question. What we did in identifying which centers we should slot for weekend hours first is we looked at the crime data that was provided to us by the police, and looked at crime data on top of our maps for our recreation centers, and those are the sites with the highest rates of crime and violence are the sites that we prioritized first for opening on weekends. The second thing we did was prioritize opening all of our gyms. So we have 51 sites with gymnasiums, and we knew that, you know, having those gyms open and available on weekends would be really amazing and wonderful for some youth sports programs, but also just for open gym. So we also prioritized opening gyms, facilities with gymnasiums. And we're also getting the word out to community partners that the facilities are open, and that's something that you all can assist us with, as well as continue to spread the word to any community organizations in your districts who are looking for places to run their programs, that we are now open on weekends, right? So they should reach out to their recreation leader and you know, let them know that they'd like free space to host their program for young people, and we'll make that space available to them.
Chair, Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bash. You had a point of order?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I had a question. So, and following up on Council Member Brooks's question, specifically recognizing particular zip codes that have been adversely affected by gun violence, and the Parks and Recreation's response to that. And the question, if I'm correct, is around allocating resources, you know, whether it's manpower, man or woman power, or financial resources to make sure that those neighborhoods are specifically receiving additional resources to address the gun violence that's happening. And I wanted to ask you about something very specific around something we're trying to do in the 19140 zip code, in which Parks and Recreation was requested to take in a parcel of real estate that was, I think it's under PRA or PIDC, or, you know, one of the agencies, but was asked to take that parcel of real estate in so that it could be added to the inventory of Parks and Rec, and that there would be additional programming at those sites, and Parks and Recreation declined. So that doesn't really match up with what you just stated, and I'm wondering if you can explain that further.
Sure. Was that the Nicetown Park
Yes,
parcels? Yeah, my apologies, because that I actually responded to that email and spoke with the Commissioner for Public Property, and we're absolutely willing to take that that property into our inventory, especially with the investments that your
Oh,
office
great.
is making.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Never
We're
mind.
very supportive of the Nicetown project and very excited about it.
Oh, very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Brooks, did you?
I know I'm almost at time because I have one other.
No, go ahead,
Because you
Council.
mentioned
Go ahead.
seasonal employees. Is it any way for these seasonal employees to eventually be moved into full-time, permanent unionized employees with Parks and Rec?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. With the budget increase that we received, we prioritized expanding positions, vacancies in a position that was rarely used in our department called the Recreation Outreach Worker. Currently, we have, I think, fewer than 20 Recreation Outreach Workers in the department. This is a great pathway for seasonal employees to come in as full-time, permanent benefits position. So we recruited within our seasonal base to encourage folks to apply for the Recreation Outreach Worker position, and I'm happy to say that we had over 100 people. I think over 50% of them are currently seasonal employees who will now have the opportunity to move into a full-time position. We're also expanding the specification for recreation leader trainee thanks to our great partners at the Office of Human Resources. We're expanding the experience levels, expanding the educational requirements for that so that we can be more inclusive in offering that opportunity to more folks as well. So we absolutely want to work with our seasonal employees to provide a pathway for them to come in full-time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Have time for one more?
Sure.
All right. The other one is not for you guys. This actually goes into L&I. Similar questioning. Based on the questions that came ahead with my colleagues around L&I, and I'm thinking about targeting anti-dumping efforts, housing inspection, removing of abandoned cars, fixing streetlights, and all of this. What is the process to make the determination around targeting these same areas?
Good morning, Ralph DiPietro, Commissioner, Department of Licenses and Inspection. So we do a couple things. One is we participate in the larger sort of citywide programs where they identify those several zip codes of where the highest amount of violence is. Now, the typical services we provide there are demolitions of structurally compromised buildings, cleaning and sealing of vacant and open buildings, and we are doing some nuisance inspections around that too. But we also have at a much larger level, we're looking at how we allocate resources in areas, particularly areas with high poverty ratios, and we've done some work pretty early on to sort of map this. The typical criticism is that a lot of L&I's work is driven by complaints. And although complaints are necessary, you need to know where the problems are. It doesn't really seem very, it doesn't seem very efficient to sort of go that way. So what we've done is we looked at both what we're doing in terms of complaints and then analyzing where are we getting lots of complaints at and then putting some additional inspector resources in those areas. So it's not just like the areas that we know that are also high violence, but areas where there's a real need. And it tends to be areas where there's older buildings, older housing stock, and where we get lots of like unfit residential units. So
So I have a right on that, but when you say unfit residential. So if someone is classified as being unfit residential and they have multiple properties, does it trigger an L&I inspection on all of their properties?
yeah, well, so not all of it, not automatically. What happens is universally when we go to a property where we find systemic, like if a lot of things are going on in the building, yeah, we'll look at everything that owner may have or that ownership entity may have and go out and inspect those buildings. It's not automatic. So you could go to a property where it's isolated to one unit that tends not to, we don't tend to then do that much larger dive. But if the building has like significant issues, then the next step we do is, we look at everything else that they own, which is why the rental license is sort of important because that's the whole purpose of the rental license. So we can find owners and see if this is like if it's a bad tenant or a bad building or if it's a bad business practice where they're doing it across all their residential units.
Okay, because I see housing as a gun violence prevention technique as well. So quality housing is important, and I see you guys as partners in breaking, and kind of disrupting, slumlords around the city. So that's kind of what my line of question was related to targeted areas. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Driscoll, and then we're going to take a brief break after Councilman Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll reserve most of my questions for the individual departments. So, but I do want to thank Chief of Staff Hernandez and Finance Director DeBow for their testimony today. But one question is, it may be for either the HR director or Commissioner Outlaw, I'm not sure. Since we still have a quarter of this year's budget to go, April, May, June, I just want to make sure that Councilmember O'Neill introduced an ordinance asking for $750,000 towards recruitment. We've also, some of the members of this body have asked our leadership for $750,000 for recruitment. That may be a shortfall. I just want to understand, is that something we do need in the next 3 months or today, since public safety and quality of life is so important, or is that something we're discussing in next year's budget? I just really need to understand that for my own.
So we do have, and the police commissioner can add, we do have money in next year's budget for recruitment, specifically in the police department, in addition to the money that the HR directors discussed. It's probably getting a little late in the year if we put money in the budget now to actually go through a process of getting a vendor, getting them on board, and having them start to do things. So it may be something that's a 24 question rather than a 23 question.
So a current vendor is not in need of any money that could hold up any recruitment efforts?
I think that's correct, but is that? Yep, that is correct.
Is that correct? Okay, thank you for clarifying. That's all I have.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. We are scheduled to come back at 1:30, so we'll break until 1:30. It's okay. Thank you. See you guys.